let's go. Let's check it out. Everything you need to know, hopefully, to help you figure out whether or not it's right for you. So when I say dice thrown in quacks, let's break that down. What do you need to know in the lighter style of dungeon crawl-esque fare? You're going to be having your own individual unique player board here that's going to give you your asymmetric abilities along with your statistics on a round-by-round basis that you're going to be keeping track of, as well as utilizing to fight off the enemies that will slowly line up above your board on a turn-by-turn basis. These action abilities are the crux of your turn as a whole. And these are going to be activated by filling the icons at the bottom of each of the abilities. So as you can see here, combinations of red and green and purple and yellow are what you're going to be utilizing. But then also on the right side, you'll see that there's a little time symbol that indicates it also needs focus as another ability that you're going to have to utilize. And you fill these up to take these actions to do damage, to fight off, to evade, to mitigate, to stun, to poison, anything along those lines. How do you get those tokens, though? You get those tokens, and this is where the quacks element comes in. You are pulling these tokens from the beginning of the round, grabbing them out, and then allocating whatever is drawn to your party, so that your party is gradually going to be employing those in a cooperative, simultaneous play style manner. And therein lies both the cleverness and the trouble, is you pull randomly from a bag. And you have to make chicken soup out of chicken bones sometimes. How do you feel about that? Now, each character individually draws 5 from the bag, so this bag is pre-populated at the beginning of your run, because this is a roguelike game. What that means is on this map over here, on the spiral-bound notebook that keeps track of the progress, is you're going to have one of these little icons, a standee in this case for the prototype, that's going to be moving across from place to place to place. The skulls being the encounters that you're going to be dealing with, and then also rooms or chests or even bosses that you're going to be potentially fighting along the way. This is going to be a 6-scenario driven campaign, they've said so far, and you can see a little bit more of a branching path on chapter 2 here, but you never have to go anywhere that you don't want to in this game. It says, frankly, if you go more places, you hit more of these areas up as you're going and traversing between, you're going to get more points. You're going to get more coins. You're going to get more experience. You're going to upgrade your characters better. But you're also going to risk failing the run and having to go back in empty hands and shame. So like any good roguelike game, the balance of do I press on or do I yield, that's what you're trying to figure out. And again, you're grabbing these tokens, utilizing them, and trying to find the mismatch of this. Now, this is again going to be a little bit reminiscent, just like Dice Throne, very similar to this in the sense that you have also individual ability cards that correspond to each character. So for example, we get Kevin's out here, and you can see that this is his set that matches his swords right here. And so you get to choose then, when you're upgrading between runs, how much do I want to spend to upgrade some of these abilities? And some of these are just going to be talents that you can do that are going to go separate, because you can have 2 separate talents in addition. And then some of them will be actual upgrades of the abilities in the first place. Fan of Knives 3, Fan of Knives 1, again, on the other side, Fan of Knives 2. So you have the ability to increase how much these are doing damage-wise, because at the bottom, it gives you what the action does if you fill it up completely. And so you have to fill it up completely as well in order to get the effect. You have things like boots here, for example, are the evasions. And you have 3 different color of dice that you're going to be utilizing in order to try and hit your enemies as a whole. And you have the blues, the yellows, and the pinks. Upgradable, utilizable, shareable, and a way to boost your attacks, because on these iconography, for example, you may just have this little blue icon down here at the bottom that's very, very tiny right there, which means you're just rolling 1 blue die. And the dice are very hard to see right now because the clear plastic on there, but some of these are actually blank sides, and some of these are crit and roll again, or crit and get a special activated ability, or just 1 hit depending on how many circles or parts of circle around the outside of those icons. And so you also have a mechanic, not only focus in order to do some of these in the first place as a resource that you're managing, but you also have a shared resource of rage. Rage allows you to buy extra dice for your attacks in the first place. But like I said, rage is shared between players. So you have to choose who's going to get it and when, depending on who's in the most danger. And therein lies the next phase of things. Apart from these talents, which we mentioned, that are going to be asymmetric permanent abilities that last the majority of your run, or the whole run, actually. I don't know why I said the majority there. But you're also going to be allocating enemies based off of random little chips that are put down depending on the strength of the enemy, which is located on the map right below us that we talked about. And so what you're doing is you're drawing these on a turn-by-turn basis when you start the battle phase, and you see what number there is at the top of them. Then the leader takes the higher numbered one, but the number doesn't actually matter. The number actually indicates the leader's responsibility, if you will, because then they draw whatever is indicated on this tile. So one red and then one white skull. And then the rest of the group would draw subsequently. And so in this case, 2-player game, I would draw one other skull and one other from that type of deck. And you can see right here that we have 2 different types of decks that we're going to be drawing from. And so then you allocate in front of your board. The allocation in this sense is going to be placing these enemies down, the variety of them, and then seeing where they need to go. Upper left, melee. And you have 6 spots that are noticeable at the top of this board that are going to be where they get assigned to. Skeleton, again, left, melee. And so I only needed to draw 2. But as you can see, you're going to start to get other things like upper right here. This is going to be the spider. And the main difference there is that these are going to be melees and these are going to be ranged, as evidenced by the sword icon for their attack action and the bow and arrow on their melee action. Very similarly, anything that you want to do melee-wise has to be against enemies that are in front of your character. But if you want to fight other people's characters and you have a melee attack, well, you can do that too, because you may have less enemies. You may have your enemies dealt with, and other people may not. And so how you balance that yin-yang and upgrades, as we'll talk about in a second, is completely up to you and your cohorts as you go along. Because if you ever fill one of these areas and it cannot be filled any further, you have 6 out there and you can't put another one down, you lose. Or if one hero goes down to 0 health, you lose. And that's where this little tracker at the top comes in, because these are your measuring bars, if you will. And I'll be frank, as a prototype, it makes it a little bit hard to keep track of at times, because all you're doing is sliding these little wooden pieces along there to keep track of. Dual layer player boards here will be actually very useful, because you can kind of see that it's a little bit harder to tell at times. Obviously, this keeps track of your shield, your evade, and your focus. And so you're going to be using those as, you know, a turn-by-turn basis to avoid enemy attacks, to mitigate them with your shield damage, but then also to utilize that focus to do the abilities down here on these actions. Because again, 1, 2, 3 of your 5 require that. Your critical ability, which is an asymmetric ability for each character, and then you're just going to rinse and repeat activating these abilities in order to roll these dice to try and get enough icons to knock out your enemies. See, great roll there for camera, 0 hits as a whole. But this yellow is actually really, really hard to see. They're changing that for the final copy. They realize how difficult that is. And so you're going to be going back and forth across this campaign map that I mentioned until either, again, you lose, you make it to the boss, and you defeat the boss. The boss is completely separately different, because the boss is going to have one main card here with various health degrees depending on the player count, and then their sort of own AI decks so that you see what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be doing it, and how you can mitigate it on a turn-by-turn basis as you go up against head-to-head. And to be clear, this wouldn't be a roguelike game if the boss was, well, not significantly harder than the minions, because it is. And you'll fail, and you'll die, and you'll go back, and you'll have to redo your run. But in between your runs, win or lose, this is where the best part of the game comes in, because that's where you're going to be spending your coins and your experience to level up those skills that I just mentioned, getting those items or potentially gathering them more so from the map and the treasure chests along the way, but then also getting your talents in order to then just make yourself better, because that's the good part about all these games, right? When you play them, it's not necessarily the first run, but it's the second run, the third run, the fourth run, the fifth run that are going to be better, because you're slowly improving each time. You're making this bag better too. I did not mention that, because you have a set of normal chips, right? Just ones with normal iconography, nothing special about them. But then you also have ones of upgraded nature here, if you can see in the middle of this one, that are going to give additional benefits or blessings on the action side of things when you draw them and utilize them, which is what you want to do in the first place, right? That is the main mode of things, the campaign story mode. There's also a one-off scenario system that's sort of a family mode that gives you a whole nother set of cards and objectives that you can kind of play through, or give you unique scenarios in order to change the difficulty, or a variant depending on the setup, depending on who goes first, depending on a few things along those lines. Because the other thing that I did not mention is you rotate between start players as you go through that map, encounter by encounter. So who's the start player, who's going to be bearing the brunt of the force and assault is going to change, and you're going to have to change with it, because you're going to have a bunch of asymmetric characters that I mentioned here. I have 4 in the base game. They say there are going to be at least 6, 2 of which are going to be unlocked at some point as you progress through the 6 different scenarios. Now, let's talk about this. Pros and cons. Pro, it's quick. It's quick. It's simultaneous. I like bag building, right? I love pulling chits and making the best of them. I like Dice Throne in general. I was not a big fan of Dice Throne originally, and then I played it for a second and a third time. My first impression was not good, and then I came back around to it years later and said, oh, okay, this is actually something that is fantastic, especially for my kids. And so this is a slight upgrade in that sense. At the same time, if you're a mitigation person, there's not going to be as much. I mean, if you don't know what a roguelike game is, essentially, right, you fall forward. You die and you get better. You die and you get better. You die and you get better until you don't die and you win. And that is what the core of this game is. Now, the blessing of this is it adapts the video game style of things, that this is quick. This is streamlined. This is not going to be overarchingly narratively driven. If you're looking for that, this is not that. But if you want something that is incredibly quick to get to the table and quick overhead, and just straightforward shooting of what you see is what you get, that's Children of Morta. The upgrades. When I upgrade, my fan of knives here though, with the abilities, for example, right down here, I have an evade, and then evade and a blue die attack ranged. Level 2 here gets an evade and then evade yellow. So slight upgrade there. And 3 is an evade blue and an evade yellow. So, you know, it's not going to change it dramatically, sort of like Dice Throne. It's a slight upgrade each individually. And there's not as many iconography to go around on all of these characters to make all of these that different. They will be different enough because you can target multiple enemies. You can target single enemies. You can get them together. You can get them separate. Rage focus. Focus. Negating damage. Being defensive. Being just a glass cannon. So there is going to be that, but there may not be as much if you're looking for a ton of asymmetry, because the asymmetry doesn't start getting in there until you get, the items as well as the individual talents for your characters in the first place. But again, the talents are, character specific. So it's not going to be as massive a tech tree as maybe you're looking for in something like, comparatively, Slay the Spire. And so that's what you're going to have to weigh. Is an easier price point, is in lower overhead, is less upkeep going to be worth it for maybe less variability and variety if you're going to play this game a dozen or more times? But therein also lies the crux of a game like this as well, is that you need to be able to play mission after mission after mission after mission after mission to really get the full benefit. Now, setup, teardown, saving, not really a big issue, but is that your play style? Because again, like I said, the cycle of roguelikes is play, lose, play, lose, play, lose, play, lose, play, lose, play, lose, win. Right? Are you going to be willing to fall forward when you can't get the draws, when you can't get the strengths of these yet, you choose the wrong combination of fighters to go together and in your raid party? Is that going to be tolerable enough for you to want you to progress? Or is that going to be a lesson in frustration? And that's where you have to know yourself in a game like this. The enemies themselves here, even within the same creatures, will have slightly varying stats in terms of rewards on the left side as well as attacks on the right. And that's nice because I worry about this just being a little bit too samey. But if you have, 6 scenarios and I have just a smattering of basically 2 incomplete ones here as a prototype, that makes me encouraged to say, okay, hopefully there's some more variety in a Marvel United way. Not that you need 70 different icons to go along with it, but you can use these iconography and this combination of iconography in completely different ways and twist it a bit to make it seem like more than what it actually is, more than what meets the eye, sort of like Marvel United does with the bosses as a whole. And that's what this really does and shines through with the bosses and how unique their actions and their asymmetry are. So again, this is where the crux of it's going to be important. The only thing I worry about is, the degree of difficulty with the bosses compared to the minions, again, is still a significant step up. So this game has the real potential for you just to be designed to fail when you get to the boss the first time, especially if you're rather good or even lucky as you're traversing that map in the first place. Here's the tricky point, right? Just like I talked about with a couple prototype impressions videos from last month on crowdfunding, things like Reign of Hades. Having only a fraction of this and what this may provide, or the mechanisms, or the different types of enemies, or the way they're going to be interacting, or even just the talents or what they can be doing with those between now and the finished product, of making them a slightly more unique if that's something that they're looking at or not. I don't know. It's hard to say how the final product is going to expand on this or not, because I could also feel like, just similarly to the video game, and this is the problem, and this is the main criticism, the video game type of situation as a whole to begin with, is it becomes a grind. It becomes doing the same thing over and over again to get slightly better result. How many times are you willing to fall forward in order to get that result? Or are you one of those people that says, okay, well, I just need this. I'm just going to take this because it's the only way I'm going to get there. I'd rather not fail these minion fights 3 times in a row in order to get enough resources, in order to get the talent or the skill or the upgrade that I need. And so let's just kind of skip over that and get to the good stuff, right? And so that balance is going to be very tricky, because that's going to be the big make it or break it, just like they are with video games, right? Like, some people like doing Slay the Spire and going up a path and just getting KO'd soon and going back down and, getting some of those upgrades, unlocking a few of those more of those cards, and then going to the next time. Oh, I didn't get that far. And then the next time I got like super far, but oh, just kidding. And then you're all the way back at the beginning. And not that it necessarily forces you to go all the way back to the beginning with this, but that, I think, is the fear. I mean, right now, the other big thing that I just can't not say as well, the iconography is really small. I mean, you can see this on this board, right? Just how tiny this is and just how hard it is to see, just even with the camera. And so just that, and just clear definitions of some of the iconography laid out in the prototype rulebook, just again, giving it the finishing touch, making these a little bit larger on here, and just balancing that spatial element of things. The motto of the video game is the family that slays together stays together, and you need to be cooperative. You will fail utterly unless you are cooperating between characters, mitigating, damaging together, helping each other out directly and indirectly, sharing those resources in order to, maximize your efforts in between and during runs. You are balancing risky, dynamic actions based on dice rolls in order to succeed or fail on a round-by-round basis. How risk-averse or mitigatable are you feeling at times? The other tricky part, that again, as I mentioned, right, there is a disconnect right now of just drawing random cards from a deck and making this and calling this a story mode. And so hopefully that is more fleshed out with the actual finished product, because otherwise it really feels like there could be a potential disconnect between just randomly drawing bats, skeletons, and goblins and, just ending up with this random boss coming out, right? As opposed to a progression, a scheme of things. And I don't need a massive narrative, but give me something to connect it to, right? There is an objective in Slay the Spire, as loosely narratively based as that, can be. There is a focused goal that you're trying to accomplish, and I don't see it yet in this prototype in that sense. There is some progression, because I didn't mention that you'll be having support cards starting in chapter 2 that you put in between your own characters, so between players sitting at the table, that offer an additional benefit here. In this case, gain a support anytime you defeat each other's enemy, so additional bonuses and things that you'll be getting. Once per turn, one of you may flip a token so the other one stuns an enemy. So just little things like that that you can utilize, that eventually, if you play enough scenarios, your characters grow bonded, which gives you a special bond. So again, things like that that aren't going to be so much overhead wise, but integrated wise, and giving your characters that sense of needed cohesiveness as you're leveling up and getting stronger. Because again, that is the cool aspect. That is the strength. That is the progression that you want to see. And that's what we need to see more of. It does this with a slight upgrade between 1 and 2. But only time will really tell about how much they have in store for us, because again, you kind of don't want to spoil it, but you kind of want to give us tasting of it. And so we need to kind of see what else they have in store for us in that sense. So all in all, where things are at, I mean, this is a prototype still, right? And it's one of those things that you can't show too much, you can't show too little. You have to show enough to entice people, but not enough to spoil all of the surprises, the mechanical twists, the dynamics that are going to be at play there, to offer players a surprising and refreshing reward as they're going along. And so therein lies the crux. Do you like the core of this, the Dice Throne-esque, upgrade your abilities, gather your individual talents and items to mitigate, to passively upgrade, to fall forward faster, further, and better, and the dynamic of the bosses and minions along the way, with the, right now, very simple and straightforward aspect of the move across the map represented as a token to illustrate the skirmish battles that you're going to be doing. Then, the allocation of the enemies, it's straightforward. It's nothing complex. There's no overt AI system that's going to confuse or confuddle you, but it's also going to be so straightforward that, again, maybe that's too min-max for you if that's not your preferred style in the first place. And it is, again, you know, bearing the lead here. It's dice dependent. If you're risk averse, if you don't like as much mitigation, you can just get bad dice rolls and not necessarily quite have the time, space, effort, or resource to mitigate it as much as you'd like. So, yeah. But all in all, there you go. Children of Morta. Check it out. Send me the prototype so I can talk to you guys about it. And give it a look-see when it goes on crowdfunding. Thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking fantastic day. Peace out.